This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and Upsnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
This is your host today, Kate Archibald, and so excited to be here with everybody. And we got a really, really rad guest that's going to be joining us today. So excited to have him on the show, along with the original gangster, Reagan Archibald. We got Reagan here, founder of East West, Anodyne, and Go Wellness, and really got some cool stuff to cover. Before we dive into that, I want to make sure everyone that was part of our Health Accelerator community last night, or our challenge, our hack group, you know what the challenge is. If you missed that last night, it is a dopamine fast. So we learned, we're on the brain reset, just learned all about dopamine, and the challenge this week is to do a 24-hour dopamine fast, so you can really reset those dopamine receptors. So that is going to be a tough one for me, especially because I would probably say I'm a dopamine addict, which I'm sure all of us are. But it will, it's going to be transformational. So really cool stuff there. If you're not a part of our hack community or our Health Accelerator community, go to ACU East West. That's acueastwest.com/HAC, hack, Health Accelerator community. And our show today is brought to you by the Smart Medicine, where you can get all your supplement needs from the Smart Medicine. All right, let's kick it off. We got Reagan Archibald here, and we have Dr. John Lieurance out of Florida, amazing practitioner. So a little bit about Dr. John. I think he's been on the show before, but he's a chiropractic neurologist, naturopath. He's been in private practice for over 25 years. He has advanced rejuvenation, a multidisciplinary clinic with a focus on alternative and regenerative medicine, naturopathic medicine, chiropractic functional neurology, functional cranial release. He's had effective results and outcomes with patients with Lyme disease, mold illness, many neurological conditions. He's an internationally known speaker and doctor. Dr. John Lieurance, welcome to the show.
Cade, Reagan, my two favorite brothers. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great.
Cade, you've got some serious hair growing there, my friend.
It's crazy what a little bit of peptides and a little bit of that Zen, that oxytocin, it just in.
That's nice. All right.
Yeah, this morning he woke up clean shaven, then he did the Zen spray, and it just went boom.
Just boom.
I love it.
Blossoms.
Oh, man.
Melatonin suppository in with that, and he just was going. So
yeah, I know. It's amazing when you do a melatonin suppository with a high dose, the next day you wake up and things are definitely different.
That's true. In a lot of ways.
So what's new and exciting in your guys' world? What do we want to dive into today?
Well, I really, I love your book. I mean, and so I wanted to just pick your brain on that because you sent it over to me, and that was maybe a couple months ago. And I told Ann, I said, we got to get Dr. Lieurance to talk about his new book because it's phenomenal. So if you're cool with that, I'd love to jump in.
I'm totally down with that.
Okay.
So, what I would like to do and offer whoever's, lucky enough to be on this to get this offer, but I'd like to offer a free download to that PDF, because basically how that kind of came to be that the book's even available, because it's kind of early, because we don't have the hard copy yet. I still had 3 chapters that I still needed to do, but I was on a really big platform, a friend in common of us, Ben Greenfield, and he's like, listen, we got to get this information out, because there's some really valuable information for infections that we both felt was really critical. So we basically said, all right, we'll make it available as a PDF download for $19.95. And so we did that right away. But what I'd like to do, because the information is so important, is we can give people a coupon code that they can do a free download of the book. And then of course, we can let them know once the book is actually in a hard copy, and then that's going to be, separate. But if that's something that you're okay with, I'd love to give your listeners a free download.
That'd be great, because we'll be going through it right now. And so they can do a download, and then they can be looking at the book as we're talking about it. So I think this is great. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're going to need to get a code to my web guy though. So,
okay.
So it would be Melatonin book. Here, let me see what I can come up with here.
And the book title is, let's see, it was the Melatonin, the Miracle Molecule, right?
Yeah. So if you go to melatoninbook.com, then that's the page that has the book on it, that you download it from there. So what we just need to do is come up with a coupon code for people. Do you want to just make things easier? Do you want to put something in like a show note or email it out to people?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so we'll email them a link that will, let me see what I've got here.
Yeah, we'll be emailing this out.
Yeah, I don't, that way I'm not trying to look through here, but it could be like Melatonin book / Reagan. It could something like that. So, cool. But I'll have a link for you within the next hour or two. And let me see if I can get back on the Zoom here. There. Okay. Okay. All right. I'm back. So melatonin.
Melatonin. Well, one of the things you said in your book, so I'll be just kind of doing a little bit of rapid fire, but I want to know why you kind of hypothesize that melatonin might be the most important hormone that we make. And so let's just dive in right there, because that was one of the first things that triggered my attention and awareness as I was reading this.
Well, so the way that I wrap my head around it is that you've got two very significant different states that we exist. We exist in a sleeping state, and then we exist in a wake, right? So sleep wake. This is our circadian rhythm. And so this rhythm carries so much information to our body to shift from one gear to another. And both gears are so incredibly important. So as much as it's important for us to be alert so that we could accomplish things where we can get nutrients into our body and we can do things that are important like exercise and doing things that are mental fitness. These are all things that happen when we're in a awake state that are very obvious to us as far as the benefit that we get. When we're in a sleeping state, though, we're relatively unconscious, but there's a lot going on there. And the signaling that allows for that phase is melatonin. And the problem that we're running into in modern day society is that there's so many what I call melatonin headwinds. And light pollution is probably at the top of my list. Most of us are completely oblivious that the lights that we have in our home are toxic to our sleep cycle. And we look at our cell phones, we're watching our TV, we're on our computer, we've got the lights in our house. There's a lot of room that people could make improvements with that. And I'd say the simplest thing is to get blue blocking glasses when the sun goes down, put those on. I actually have prescription blue blocking glasses, so I can watch TV and things like that. So you got the blue blocking glasses at night, and then what I've done is I've taken lamps and I've taken red lights and I've put them in all of these little lamps, and I've got little remote control for the light socket. And in the book, I have a whole chapter on how I did this with pictures. But
Yeah.
when you go to my house at night, it's red lights, and it's very warm and relaxing. When you find yourself in that situation and then you turn on the regular lights, it's absolutely amazing how activating to the central nervous system you can feel.
Yeah.
How strong of a negative effect it has on your ability to kind of be relaxed when you want to be more relaxed leading into sleep.
Well, and I even walk into my kid's school and I'm like, these lights are so toxic. I mean, it disrupts my nervous system just by being in there for a few minutes. And I look at the kids and the challenges and the diagnosis with ADD, ADHD. And I wonder if we didn't change the light in the schools, if that wouldn't have an impact on kids' behavior. Do you know of any studies, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's been some really interesting studies just on the color that they paint. Like, for instance, you go to McDonald's, those colors are very specific for you to get excited. And you talked about dopamine, you get a little bit of dopamine, a little serotonin hit, but you're there for like 20, 30 minutes. It becomes too much where you want to get out of there. And there are a lot of studies. It's something that I don't have a lot of that information just readily available, but I know that color, whether it's coming from the light itself or even the paint on the wall, can carry tremendous impacts to your central nervous system and how balanced or non-balanced you could be.
Yeah. So melatonin is the chief hormone in regulating the central nervous system, essentially, because it's our circadian rhythms. It's our brain's awake and sleep cycle, which are so important. And I think what people don't realize too is our brains are actually using more energy when we're sleeping than when we're awake, by about 5 to 7%. And so what you're saying is one of the big, I think you called it a melatonin headwind, the thing that keeps our melatonin cycles disrupted. Number one on probably the top of your list is light. What would be some of the other disruptors?
Well, so really having birthdays is another headwind. I mean, we don't know if you were to be like living in a bubble and like the perfect environment out on an island or something like that, no mental emotional stress, maybe there would be a different decline. But when you look at the graph of melatonin and age, it goes down so steeply, especially after 40. And it's almost next to nothing when you're in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. So you start to have to think about, like, do you want some of the benefits that melatonin's been shown to give, even beyond sleep, which that's what we really dive more into in the book. I'd say a lot more into all the other benefits of melatonin besides sleep. But so having birthdays can be very detrimental. I think that argument says no matter what you do, just having birthdays warrants, I think, people that want to be healthier, they want to be more vital, they want to be more resistant to some of these infections that are coming along, really need to start looking at taking melatonin as a supplement. But back to your question, EMFs can be very destructive to your melatonin levels. You really want your melatonin to be released and utilized at night while you're sleeping. And so if you have a Wi-Fi router, those waves actually go into your skull. And when they interact with your pineal actually thinks that it is sunlight.
Oh, wow.
So we even start to think about, when we look at the studies with EMF and how EMF can have a detrimental effect on our health as regards to cancer, right? I mean, I think most of the studies that they did are out of Europe, and literally the cancer was on the side that the people that holding the phone, or it was, the kidney cancer on the side that they had their cell phone in their pocket, or ovaries or whatnot. So there's been some really powerful connections. And so, I start to think that maybe there's also a connection with Wi-Fi and cancer because of its negative effect to melatonin. And although when people go and they get this free download, one of the chapters that I hadn't finished yet was on cancer. The other one was liver. And then there's a chapter on pineal, which Reagan, I got it. This could almost be a book in of itself. I almost feel like it's one of my masterpiece works, is just this one chapter on the pineal. But you start to get into some just fascinating information about spirituality, right? And our connection to source. And there's such a strong connection with melatonin and the pineal and the sun and the sleep wake cycle, and how melatonin can actually even be converted into something called DMT, which some people could argue, they call it the spirit molecule, but it could be, you could argue that this potential molecule is what allows us to see what's real, like where we are, who we are, where we're from. Most people will report back this feeling of oneness, this feeling of they're with God, they're with Christ. And I would say universally, a lot of people start to understand more of what is behind a lot of the messages behind many religions, and so fascinating that this happens to be tied into melatonin.
Yeah, because DMT, I mean, you can even elicit DMT through certain breathing techniques, like the holotropic breathing, for example, or even Wim Hof. So yeah, and if everyone's afraid, like, oh man, they're talking about DMT, I've had patients who have done ceremonies with DMT and it snapped them out of this complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And it was just like they finally woke up to who they are, because it regulated their central nervous system. And apparently it did something to their melatonin, which, we got the melatonin expert of the world here in Dr. Lieurance. So I think your whole work and the pineal gland is fascinating, because even the peptide epitalin, it's a telomerase enzyme. So it actually activates that longevity cycle in your body. So it's very interesting.
Some fascinating I mean, we're just, I think, scratching the surface on our understanding. And, it's interesting. One of my best and favorite mentors, Dr. Russell Ryder, he's actually a PhD and an MD. In the late 60s, he was the first scientist to actually discover that the pineal was more than just a worthless gland. And so that led him into being one of the primary researchers into melatonin and a number of different health benefits. And so he was one of the people, there's actually a YouTube video that you could probably find if you search it. It's maybe a 45-minute video. And after watching that video, that was one of the things that really opened me up to, like, wow, like there's something very, very fascinating about melatonin.
And so, how do we find that video? And
I'll get it. I'll send you a link.
Okay,
I'll
perfect.
send you a link. Yeah.
Right.
So, but Russell himself takes 100 to 200 milligrams of melatonin every night.
Every night. How much are you taking these days? Because every time I talk to you, you've increased your dose a little bit.
Well, I don't know. We haven't talked in a while, but I had COVID. I got the Delta version of COVID about a month ago.
Oh.
And it took me out for a couple of weeks. And so I ramped up my melatonin levels to about 800 milligrams a night. And I was also even dosing it during the day. So probably we're talking close to definitely over a gram, gram and a half every 24 hours.
And how long did you do that?
I did that for the acute phase that I had, and then afterwards I backed it off maybe 50% of that, which I'm still at. So I'm still kind of, if I could be completely candid and clear, I really would have expected me to go through that process with a lot more grace. I got the Delta version and it kicked my butt. It was pretty rough, even with the melatonin, which I'm a big proponent. One of the things that happens with melatonin with infection is that when you have an infection, there's cytokines. So any type of stress, infection stress being one of them, any type of stress is going to relate into an inflammatory reaction in the body. And that inflammatory reaction is mediated, meaning that there are chemicals involved in this process that are called cytokines. And there's a number of different cytokines that will represent the different type of stressors. So when you have something like COVID, there's a very specific family of cytokines that are involved in that inflammatory cascade. But what ultimately happens is that the cell is going to suffer from this stress where it shifts its energy production into a much more primitive, inefficient form of energy where you get only about 10% of the energy that you would normally get. And this happens in a part of the cell called the mitochondria, which is literally where the rubber meets the road for energy. This is where oxygen and glucose come in. And what happens when you have inflammation is the mitochondria completely shuts down. And so the energy then has to be shuttled out of that mitochondria. And like I said before, you have this 10% of what you would normally get. And so if you could imagine someone that's under the impact of an infection, right? They're actively being infected. There's an immune response, and those immune cells need energy to fight the battle. And then all of a sudden, you could imagine that energy is shut off. There's no energy for the immune cells to fight. The immune cells then become basically kind of like inert. And so the infection can completely take over. And they call that the cytokine storm. And this is where people can die. And this happens with a lot of different infections like Ebola, just regular pneumonia for a lot of elderly, because poor mitochondria function is what happens when we get older. We get less efficient at converting oxygen and glucose efficiently in our cells, where we don't produce a lot of waste, right? So we can make the energy efficiently. We can make it where it's full, robust, 100% versus that 10%. And this is where melatonin comes in. So melatonin is the primary quencher of these cytokines. And when things get out of control, studies have shown that we can give people exogenous melatonin. And the studies that I think really shine the most, these levels are very high. We're not talking about 2 or 3 milligrams of melatonin. These are very high levels. So a lot of people that listen to this start to think, okay, well, is it safe to take a lot of melatonin? Am I going to shut down my own production? And the answer is, it's one of the only hormones that the body produces that does not shut down your own production. Like for instance, if you were to take testosterone or estrogen, your body's going to say, oh, we've got that. We can produce less of it ourselves. Melatonin doesn't have that effect. So there is no concern by taking as high levels of melatonin as you need or want, or your body or a doctor, healthcare practitioner might prescribe, because there is not that situation. And then also, is melatonin toxic? If I take a gram of melatonin or 200 milligrams of melatonin, is that something that my body's going to have to fight with, and it's going to be stressful to the body? They did studies where it would be like taking 150,000 milligrams. And they stopped the study because they're like, doesn't seem to be any toxic levels at all.
No toxicity, no lethal dose. No, I mean, that's impressive.
There's literally when you read through my book, one of the things, if you pay attention to like every single study that I reference, almost all of the researchers at the end say, we don't see any negatives at all. Like all we see is positives. Therefore, this is a rich area for more research and more discovery into liver, into skin, into, so the way that the book is structured is the first chapter or two is really setting the stage and kind of getting you familiar with stress and melatonin and kind of the sleep-wake cycle and some of the basics. And then each chapter is broken down into a separate pathology, like it could be brain, skin, cancer, liver, gut, some amazing things to talk about with gut and melatonin, by the way. And then we have a conclusion chapter at the end. So if people feel a little overwhelmed, because there's a lot, it's a big book, there's a lot of information there, they might just go and say, well, I want to look at autoimmunity and melatonin, or I might want to look at mental, emotional, or I might want to look at, autism in kids. So you can read the first chapter or two and then skip to whatever chapter you're really interested in learning about, as far as like what you were kind of curious about how melatonin can help.
Yeah, because you've got, this is what I love about your book, because you've got melatonin in cardiovascular, melatonin in infections, melatonin and neurological disease, melatonin for children, melatonin toxic factors, melatonin for diabetes. So, I mean, it's, after I read your book, and you and I have had conversations about melatonin for years now, and it just, it really hit on the fact that, wow, these small doses of melatonin, 1 milligram, 3 milligrams, which is what you're going to find over the counter, they might not even be scratching the surface as far as what melatonin can do. We need to start ramping it up much more. And so you pioneered this. So,
well, I saw somebody just ask the question where they can buy it. I should, as a disclaimer, I'm the chief science advisor for mitozen.com. And I think we do maybe a coupon code for people, but we manufacture a high dose melatonin, and we have it in two basic forms. One of them is a suppository, and we can talk a little bit about why that is really, I think, a fantastic way to absorb it. And then we have it in what's called a liposomal. One of the things that I found fascinating when I really started to dive into looking at melatonin is when you take it orally, when they researched it, it's only 2.5% absorbed. So what happens is your liver, as it runs a first pass, your digestive enzymes are so damaging to the molecule that such a little amount of it actually makes it into your bloodstream. Right. So I started to, as I got extremely interested in melatonin, I started to look around at ways that we could get much higher amounts into the bloodstream because there's no injectables available. And so my first choice would be a suppository. So basically this is a kind of a bullet shaped, made of organic palm oil. And then we have melatonin, we have glutathione, and we have magnolia, and there's some linalool, which is the active terpene from lavender. I mean, there's some really, really good stuff in there. There's some full spectrum hemp. So really, I was looking at everything that I could that would really support quality deep sleep, because there is literally nothing on the market for that, especially from a prescription standpoint.
Yeah.
There's a difference between being knocked out and actually going and having quality sleep. Some of the things that you're going to really want to look at are your heart rate variability. These are some indications of really good quality sleep and wellness. Your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. Have you guys talked much about heart rate variability?
Oh yeah. Yeah. On previous shows we have, but it would be great to have just a refresher for the audience.
Okay. So the heart rate variability. So imagine your heart is controlled by two parts of what's called your autonomic nervous system. And you have your fight or flight, or your sympathetics, and you have your resting and digesting, or your parasympathetics. So when you're resting and digesting, this is when you're asleep, right? This is where melatonin is so supportive with regard to your parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that it's in our modern day society, we're revved up too much. There's too much sympathetics. And what happens is the heart, because it's controlled by the sympathetics and the parasympathetics, there's going to be a variability where sometimes there's more control that the sympathetics are going to take on, And other times there's going to be more control that the parasympathetic is going to take on. And so if you have too much dominance with the sympathetics, then you're going to have a consistent sympathetic rhythm to the heart. And you're not going to have that input from the parasympathetics, which is going to vary. It's going to make things variable, right?
Yep.
So we do, and I say this so broad spectrum because you're not really going to find many cases where people have too much parasympathetic causing their heart rate variability to be low.
Right.
So you don't want your heart rate variability low. You want it to be higher. You want more variation. So as we get older, when you look at the graph, we talked about the melatonin graph, as it drops down, heart rate variability looks almost exactly like this graph. And so it's my postulation that melatonin is so hardwired to heart rate variability, because one of the things that we see when we start putting people on these higher doses of melatonin is that they're just shocked at how amazing their HRV is.
Yep. Yeah, and that's heart math is one of the you put a little device on your ear, and then you have an app on your phone, and you can do a breathing synchronization with it, and then that can test your heart rate variability. But yeah, it's a phenomenal test, and I've actually done it when I've used Sandman, and it's just, you know, using the Aura ring specifically shows the heart rate variability improvements by using it. So
beautiful.
So yeah, just you know, I'm a study of one, but all of you have an opportunity to try this. So MitoZen is where they can get the majority of these products. We have a lot of them in the clinics, especially the Salt Lake clinic. For those of you who are in the Salt Lake area and patients of ours, you know. And by the way,
definitely do that, because we have to ship it, and it's literally like $40 to ship it. So if you can pick it up there at the clinic, it's a huge advantage. Reagan, you actually have a landing page, and I think we already have a coupon set up for you on that page.
We do, yeah, and maybe Kate or Ann knows what it is. I'm not sure what it is right off the top of my head, but we'll get that landing page and get you guys a discount on that too, because phenomenal things. I mean, this is the Zen spray that you've made, the glutastat, the neurodial. I mean, there's just some innovations that you've come up with that are amazing.
Well, you know, the NAD is really exciting as well. I know a lot of people are real excited. I know that are you still doing NAD IVs at your center?
We do some, but we're mostly using your nasal spray. That's our primary use of it now. It's just it's easier, it's safer, seems to be more effective.
Well, you know, I think a lot of people, you know, we were one of the earlier adopters with NAD, which, you know, I know earlier for people that may be watching this that don't know what NAD is, it's something that we lose a lot of as we age, and it really limits our ability to make energy and have a strong metabolism. So, especially for your heart and your brain, a lot of people find when they start replenishing their NAD levels, that they feel a lot better. So historically, when we first started doing NAD infusions, we were charging $1,500, and the people would have to sit here for like 5 to 8 hours doing these slow drips, and they'd feel kind of like this heaviness in their chest, and it's a bit uncomfortable. And so what I came up with is a suppository with NAD, and also two of the precursors, you know, because there's all this kind of controversy is nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide, which, sorry to throw these big names around, but these are precursors to NAD. They're saying, okay, well, this one's better, or this one's better. You can't take straight NAD, blah, blah, blah. Which is true, because a lot of these things, just like melatonin, only a small fraction of them will make it into the bloodstream. Yeah. So things like putting it into a liposome or putting it into a suppository, where I think suppository has a more superior effect, because you have a slow bleed into the bloodstream over the period of 3 to 5 hours. So you can basically wake up in the morning, you can have your first morning bowel movement, or maybe after lunch. You put this suppository in, you don't even know it's there. And it's like you're walking around running an NAD IV. It's
Right.
phenomenal.
Yeah. And I know for some of you, it might be like, oh man, that sounds really weird and uncomfortable. It's actually easy. You do it a couple times and you'll get the hang of it. So, and if you look at the vasculature, this is how you explained it to me, Dr. Lieurance, is you've got all this vasculature down in the rectal area. And so it is literally like getting an IV drip, because it's getting to your bloodstream the same way that a nutritional IV will. It bypasses the liver, bypasses the hydrochloric acid in your stomach and that whole digestive tract. So it's a phenomenal application for.
It actually gets pulled up through those big vessels and it gets dumped almost directly in your heart. It's really beautiful.
I didn't know that.
So it's a really, really great. It's I would even say that there's an argument to say if you had the option to do an NAD IV or an NAD suppository, that it may even be better to do, it's called NAD Max or NAD Max is the name of the product. But I would almost argue it's better to do that because it's more convenient. And you can't get the precursors in an IV anyway, right? So you're talking about almost as much dosage as an IV would do, which is 500 milligrams. And then we have 250 milligrams of the nicotinamide riboside and 250 milligrams of the NMN, plus this whole conversation about NAD. And so many people take it daily, which this is something that we probably should talk about. Not the best idea, because we have this. And I heard you guys were talking about fasting a little bit. And so one of the things that we want to think about when we fast is that we go into this stage of cleaning. And one of the things that we clean out is these old zombie cells called senescent cells. And this is one of the huge benefits of fasting in intermittent, if intermittent fasting or longer fasting durations. So when we want to clear out these senescent cells, they are supported by NAD. So imagine if we're fasting, but we're taking like an NAD support every day. Not the best idea, because if you're trying to clear out these senescent cells, yet you're at the same time supporting them with NAD, you're really not getting the full signaling of clearing senescent cells that you'd want to have. And that's where we start to kind of get into some of our fast track fast protocols, where we preload with NAD and then we don't take NAD, and there's some what's called Senolytics that we have in some other products that are in suppository and liposomal that you can actually take while you're fasting, to it, just like we talked about melatonin, how we're increasing like a signaling of rest and digest and parasympathetic. The same thing happens when we feed and we fast. So this is almost an equally important conversation to start to have. And so there's nutrients that can actually be good tailwinds that you can get stronger signaling for the repair and the cleaning and that autophagy. And on the back end of it, just as important, which so many people don't pay attention to, is increase your protein. So after you fast, we want you to increase your protein content and the signaling to growth and repair. Almost equally as important.
It's got to be, because it's a yin yang balance, right? You can't be fasting all the time and expect your body to fully recover without the right nutrients on the back end. And so I want to get a little bit back to melatonin and infection, because you got the Delta variant, and holy smokes. And you're somebody who is, you walk the talk, you live the lifestyle. And so what advice do you have now that you've been through it? I mean, and I know I'm getting asked every day, what do you think about the vaccine? What should I do? What's the best route? So I'd love to get it right from the horse's mouth. Like what was it like? And if you could go back, is there anything different you do, and what was successful? I know you talked about your melatonin dosing, which was, awesome, but yeah, maybe we could dive a little bit into that if you're okay with it.
Oh, totally. Actually, I've been a caregiver. It was a second excuse me, it was the second time I'd had COVID. The first time was a couple of years ago before it was even released in the news. And I got very, very sick, got a lot of other people very sick. Actually came through Utah, I think that Christmas, and a lot of people that we know in common caught this. And so I've been a caregiver. I've been like, hey, and it was very mild for me. I mean, I was sick, and it was probably one of the worst flus I ever had, but nothing like what I experienced with this last bout with the Delta variant. There was extreme nerve pain. And for me, there wasn't a lot of upper respiratory effects. And so this is one of the things that it can be really common with the Delta version, is that it may not actually get into your chest and your upper respiratory system. But there's a lot of extreme fatigue. I think I was sleeping literally like 22 hours a day.
Wow.
And there was a few days where it got a bit scary for me. I was kind of thinking, should I go to the hospital? What happened to me that I think is very unusual, and what made it more scary, and I think it brought me into a much more dangerous place than I would have expected, is I developed these hiccups, and they just would not stop. I mean, Reagan, I was like trying to catch my breath because the hiccups were literally that intense. I actually recorded it and sent it to some friends. It was nuts. So I would wake up in the middle of the night and the hiccups would kick in. They wouldn't be happening when I was sleeping, but when I would wake up, they would kick in. And I would literally be almost like I couldn't breathe. It was so intense. So I was almost wanting to go to the hospital because I was afraid because of this hiccup situation. And maybe I could get some medication to settle down the hiccups. But then I'm thinking, they're going to put me on a ventilator because they're not going to really understand. So I was like, I'm probably worse off going to the hospital,
Right.
Which I still believe that. I think the I'm going to go out on the limb and say, I believe the hospitals are killing people. I think there is some shitty things happening right now with COVID at the hospitals. I think the testing is so sensitive that a lot of people that just have straight up pneumonia are getting pushed into the COVID protocol.
Right.
All of these hospitals have they're doing protocol, which is still including remdesivir, which is lethal. Yeah. I just got a call from my grandmother in St. Pete, and one of her friends from the retirement, had gone in, and she's like, yeah, they're putting her on remdesivir and this, that. I'm like, no, right. If I could we could talk so much about this, but let's just talk about remdesivir. Fauci, who I'm not a big fan of, by the way, he basically came out and said, we're going to emergency access remdesivir. It's going to be everybody that goes to the hospital, anybody that gets COVID, they're going to go on this drug, right? And then he has two links that basically support this decision that he made. One of the links, if you click it, it goes to a study that was done with Ebola and 4 different drugs. And Fauci had financial ties to 2 of them, okay?
Oh, man.
And they had to stop the study because too many people were dying in the study with both of his drugs, including remdesivir, who he has strong ties with through Gilead. And the other drug, I don't remember the name of it, but it was also they had to stop it because it was so dangerous. So they used this study as one of the studies to say, hey, remdesivir is a good idea to put people in with COVID.
Knowing that most people aren't going to read the study, yeah.
Yeah, the second study included 53 people in 3 or 4 different countries.
Wow.
And all it did was show that it reduced the hospital stay by a day or 2. Like it was even like there are things like melatonin and blah, 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 blah. I mean, we could kind of go on that high dose vitamin C that would make a massive and has shown to make such a big impact on the condition. And so you're talking about something that had such a minuscule effect on that one parameter that they looked at. But what was really interesting is the effect that remdesivir has on the liver and the kidneys. And when you look at New York City, that I know a lot of the top viral practitioners and physicians there were like, we've never seen a virus have this type of an effect on the kidneys. There was a lot of people dying of kidney damage and kidney disease. And I would offer that it was probably people dying because of the hospital protocol, which if you don't know and you're not educated and you don't have someone going with you to the hospital asking the right questions, you are going to get the protocol, which could actually be more dangerous than the virus.
Yeah. So what did you do? I mean, I remember when you had COVID early on, we didn't know what it was. And then later you're like, oh man, I had COVID. And now you got the Delta variant. So you didn't have the immunity to protect you.
So that would make, either the antibodies were depleted by the time I got it here recently from the first time I got it. Or the other potential answer would be that that you don't have immunity for this new Delta variant, even if you've gotten the past variants. So we don't really know that, but I can tell you that it's real. You will get very sick. You could potentially get extremely sick. I know a number of people that have had it. A friend of mine caught it. I think either he gave it to me or I gave it to him. There's a few people that I know have contracted it here locally, and everybody kind of has the same report back that it was pretty gnarly. Some pretty dark moments within that infection.
And I agree. Ruth shares in the chat, antibodies don't stick around. You should have T-cell immunity, but some of the new research is emerging where they're kind of wondering if this variant wasn't a little more aggressive based on the fact that based on the vaccine that has been deployed to, I'm sure it's billions of people now. So I don't know if you've looked into that at all, but
when would it ever be a good idea to get people to produce all of these spike proteins for who knows how long, and how toxic those spike proteins are? And then, there seems to be some evidence that people after they're vaccinated could actually be shedding these spike proteins and getting other people sick. There's just so many unknowns, and people are being basically thrown into this experiment without informed consent.
Yeah, because it's interesting. It's either you're a vaccine fanatic, you want everyone to get vaccinated, or you're an anti-vaxxer, and there's no room in the middle for some open dialogue, which is all you and I are having. It's like, well, let's look at
I want science. I want hard science, and to me, it makes sense that someone maybe in their 65 or 70, maybe that might be a better kind of people that are more classically in a situation where they would be more risk to die, to get critical to severe. It's not the younger, healthier people, it's the older people. And so, why are we just blanket vaccinating the entire planet? It's like absolutely, it's just nuts.
Yeah, it is. It's challenging, especially when I've got kids. And so it's, always heavily on my mind, and looking at some of the things my decisions, what does that decision do to their future? Whether it's lack of activities because now because they're not vaccinated, or does it mean that, that if they got vaccinated, what would be the side effects that come 5 years from now, 10 years from now? We just don't know. And so
they don't know. I mean, those spike proteins, what they do to the ovaries, that they tend to accumulate into the ovaries. They say, oh, well, it stays in the deltoid. No, it does not. It goes throughout the entire body, right?
Yeah.
I just think that the censorship and the media is just it's everything that people should be terrified about. Because let's even just move past this whole situation with vaccines and COVID. These are some dangerous times for us. Look at how the media is controlling the narrative, and people just are not hearing anything except what big pharma wants them to hear. And it's all roses and, you know, the vaccines or this, that, and the other. They're not hearing any of, I mean, people are rioting on the streets in Italy over this, and you're not seeing that in the news.
No.
I mean, there's countries that have, you know, it's like, get those vaccines out of here. You know, the science doesn't back it up. You're not hearing any of that in the United States because of the censorship.
Yeah. It's pretty ridiculous. I mean, we've had protests actually in the United States, in Salt Lake, as a matter of fact, where people are like, hey, we need some real data, some real evidence. So yes, it is pretty interesting. So if we had to look at, we've got about 5 minutes. And so if we looked at, you know, some of the ways that you could mitigate your risk with melatonin, what would be like 3 or 4 things that people could do right now? And this is not medical advice, so I don't want this show to get censored. I just, you know, if you just looked at some overall strategies you could do to boost your melatonin, which has been linked to more robust immunity, what are some things people can do right away?
Well, you know, so this would be my hit list of things to look at to have a strong immune system. Vitamin D levels. I would take high doses of vitamin D. I would take high doses of melatonin. I would look at things other than just like an oral pill. Again, we'll put a link so people can have access to looking at some of the products that we have at Mitozen. Olive leaf is a good supplement to take that can help prevent that strong kind of inflammatory reaction that happens with a viral infection. Quercetin and zinc taken together can be really good. The quercetin helps the zinc get into the cell, and the zinc can really have a good support for viral infections. And then, you know, I think that taking some enzymes can really be helpful. Enzymes on an empty stomach can really help your blood get, you know, be a little bit thinner. It helps kind of keep your tissues a bit cleaner. You know, the big conversation I think a lot of people aren't having is the sinuses. And I know that you and I have touched on this in the past in podcasts, I think, is, you know, this biofilm that starts to collect in the sinuses that acts as this flypaper. So if you can imagine, if you're out at the store or whatever, and somebody has COVID and you've got some COVID kind of floating in the air, there's a potential that could kind of stick to the mucous membranes in the upper respiratory tract if there's more accumulation of this biofilm. So doing like sinus hygiene with like the glutastat, you know, that we can also have, I think that's on your landing page. It's an antimicrobial nasal spray. So some sort of like daily spray that you do to kind of keep the sinuses clean. One of the things I know Dr. Pompa, a common friend of ours, is doing with people is he's doing so that's the glutastat. It's called Marcon's B. Okay. So I know you and I do a lot together with like mold and Lyme and so forth. So there's this Marcon's infection that a lot of people can get in their sinuses. And so we have this kind of protocol with these sprays, but within the protocol, there's this Marcon's A and B, and the Marcon's B is EDTA and colloidal silver. And so what that can do is that can really rinse out any type of spike proteins so that they can't kind of attach in the mucous membrane. So I just, in general, I think doing some sort of sinus hygiene can really prevent and help you both pre or during an infection.
Man, that is powerful. So, and that's something that I've been doing nonstop since you've got me into these nasal sprays. So these are great tips. Get the book. You guys have the free download today, but you guys will not want to miss out. Melatonin, a miracle molecule, beyond sleep, fight infection, degenerative neurological diseases, depression, autoimmunity, aging, heart disease, and cancer, by none other than my good friend, Dr. John Lieurance. And it's so good to catch up. And yeah,
you know, Reagan, what I would like to do is, we varied off of melatonin quite a bit. I still think there's a lot of meat left on that melatonin bone. And
Yeah, for sure.
we should circle back and talk more about how amazing it is and how it could be used in other ways. Why don't we do that when the book is released in hard copy, and we can offer your listeners a discount on that book. And so they'll have access obviously now, but there's a few chapters that they probably are going to want to read.
Yeah, I love that. Let's do it. So please hit me up and let's get that on the book. So thanks so much for another amazing show.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Cade, you've been kind of quiet there, my friend.
I was just enjoying the show. I just kind of sat back and was like, I'm going to let these guys run with this because, yeah, amazing stuff. Thank you, fellas. That was awesome. And for those of you that are just listening and don't see the chat box, a lot of those products mentioned was Mitozen. You can go to Mitozen. That's mitozen.com/go wellness. And then you can look at all different, those different products that were mentioned with Glutastat. Zen, that's like by far my favorite. It feels like you're snorting pepper spray. But as soon as the initial shock wears off, it is fantastic. I love it. That's one of my favorites, Dr. John. All right. Well, we'll see you guys same time, same place next week. Thanks again. Have an amazing week, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.